This is IAQ Radio, Indoor Air Quality Radio, the voice of the indoor air quality industry, with your host, Radio Joe Hughes, and the Z-Man, Cliff Zlotnick. And now, Radio Joe Hughes.
All right, good day and welcome to IAQ Radio. And it's episode number 500, over 10 plus years and 500 episodes of IAQ Radio. This week, we're going to turn the tables. We've got four great industry, noted industry people from all around. We've got John Downey, Pete Consigli. We've got John Lapotaire, and who's my fourth? Has got the Z-Man. Well, Bob Krell, too, from Healthy Indoors Magazine. So they're going to turn the tables on us this week and ask us some questions. Before we do that, though, we want to thank our marquee sponsors.
IAQ Radio marquee sponsors are John Don Products, where restoration and abatement contractors shop. Visit them at jondon.com. That's JONDON.com. Healthy Indoor Magazine, a free online digital magazine for industry professionals and consumers. Subscriptions are available at healthyindoors.com. Particles Plus, engineers and manufacturers feature rich particle counters, air quality monitoring, instrumentation, and vacuum pump technology. ParticlesPlus.com. Count on it. And now you can win a cool prize. It's time for the IAQ Radio trivia question. Be the first to correctly answer. Simply email your answer to czlotnick@cs.com. Or if listening live, just text your answer from your computer. And now, here's the Z-Man with this week's IAQ Radio trivia question.
Hello, everyone. I'm sorry to report there was no correct answer to last week's trivia question, which was to name Stephen Hawking as the cosmologist and physicist who coincidentally was born on January 8th, 1942, the same day 300 years later that astronomer, mathematician, philosopher, and physicist Galileo Galilei died. The IQ Radio question for today, Friday, April 6, 2018, has been sponsored by Ideas, the solution chemistry company, creating unique solutions to odor removal, surface cleaning, and decontamination problems. Today's trivia question is, what is the prime factorization of the number 500? Back to you, Joe.
Thanks, Cliff. Hey, I want to go back to the sponsor audio or video that you have there, John. I want to do a special shout out to John Don. John Don Products, where restoration and abatement contractor shop, has been a steady, long time sponsor, platinum sponsor. We're going to move that up to platinum now because they've been so good to us over the years, Cliff. And I just thought I wanted a little extra shout out to John Don here on our 500th show. They've been great. Of course, our other sponsors, we'll talk more about them. And one other thing I want to mention with respect to sponsors, we've got a new one this week, and we'll play their information at halftime. But the RIA, the Restoration Industry Association, has joined us as another industry sponsor along with the Indoor Air Quality Association. And, of course, we want to thank all of our sponsors, including Particles Plus, Healthy Indoors Magazine, Gray Wolf Sensing Solutions. Without them, we couldn't do the show. So what I'd like to do at this point is turn things over to the guys. We're going to kind of turn the tables a little bit. I want to start with John Downey. And, John, before you ask a question, though, I want you to tell people about your new position, because I think that's a big industry, big news for the industry. In case people hadn't seen the news announcement that went out not long ago, please tell people what you'll be doing now.
Well, first, Joe, congratulations, and Cliff, congratulations. 500 episodes. Wow. What says more than anything is how old you guys are, but and thank you for giving me a chance to talk about my new position. I was recently hired as the executive director of the Cleaning Industry Research Institute, or CIRI as it's known. And in that position, CIRI is essentially it's a science organization whose focus in the past has been almost exclusively on research. It's done research, especially in the commercial cleaning industry, the janitorial side. But in bringing me on board, there is a desire to increase our communications. We're going to publish a peer-reviewed journal. And we're also going to, in other ways, really ramp up the communications aspect of what CIRI does, has done, does, and will do in the future. So they felt that I was a good selection for that, and I'm really excited about it. We're updating the bylaws and the vision and the mission statement. And in the next few weeks, we're going to be coming out with a lot more information about the activities that CIRI is going to be doing, starting really in the first quarter or early second quarter of this year.
Well, that's good news, John. I mean, we've always been big into research to practice, and I'm looking forward to working with you more with CIRI on that topic, because I think CIRI's got some good old research too that's been done over the years that I think a lot of people may not be aware of. So
Exactly. Yeah.
Get more into that. All right, so number 500 here, Cliff. It's been amazing, John. Our current. I want to mention John. You got to have faith at the controls here. He's our current engineer, and he's made my life so much easier. And he did this really neat word art. What do you call this, John? Word cloud from all the different titles from IAQ Radio shows over the years, and it's been very interesting. It kind of, you can see what our focus has been. We've got a lot of IAQAs on there, presidents, MDs. We had CIHs, and one of the guys I want to mention too is Dr. Dietrich Wow, who was our technical director for many years. He's since retired and still hanging in there, Dieter. And we've got a clip about him, clip from him a little bit later in the show. But I wanted to point that out. And then Cliff, I don't know if you want to go down the line of the old technical directors over the years, or if you want to save that for later.
No, I'm just trying to. I have to remember them all.
Your son.
Yeah, absolutely. Zach, my son, was the first one. Then I think it was the wingman after that, Chris Boisel. That was environmental, and Koalecki after that. And
we had Roxy V, Val Bender.
Right.
So we've gone down a list of engineers over the years, and we're finally to the point now where we've got both audio and video. Hey, John, let me start with you, John Downey. You put together some questions. Throw one at us.
All right. I think I'm not going to start with the first one because that's probably what you were prepared for me to start with, but rather the second one, and that is, and you can answer collectively or separately. I'm curious about information that you learned on the show, and it could be on a one show or perhaps over the course of a few shows, that caused a kind of a fundamental paradigm shift in your thinking about indoor air quality, cleaning, restoration, remediation.
Cliff, why don't we let you start on that?
Okay. Thanks, John. Okay. I think that, for me, there are two. The first one that's a little bit smaller was we had a guest by the name of Andy Streifel, and Andy is an expert on what's going on from a microbial contamination point of view in hospitals. And in Pittsburgh, where Joe and I live, we had some issues with a major hospital here, and they lost a number of patients from fungal infections. And the discussion with Andy really dealt with pressurization. And it turned out that this particular hospital was negatively pressurizing these containment rooms for patients, and they were drawing in a bunch of contaminants, and people got sick and people died. So really the importance of pressurization, positive pressurization in hospital rooms, to me, really can be a life and death situation. The second, and really the bigger one for me, is Sloan Foundation research on the microbiome. And I think in the cleaning and restoration world, for a long period of time, we have been trying to kill everything. and sterilize these types of environments. And I think one of the things that Sloan Foundation research has pointed out is that every room, every person actually has your own living microbiome, and that you're never going to be able to kill everything or sterilize everything. We have to live with it, and that many of these, the vast majority of the microorganisms are beneficial. We need them to live. So I think, to me, that kind of changed my thinking in terms of microbiome.
Great, that was great. Thank you.
Thanks.
Cliff, you bring up two really good points. I thought you were going to say something different with Andy Streifel, but I'll mention that. And it's not just Andy; it's you and many of our restoration guests over the years, and meeting with you and Pete Consigli up in Chicago when we did the show with the John Donne founders. And then at that point, you guys were doing a course on, I guess it was a certified restorer prep course.
Correct.
And the focus on contents in the restoration industry is something I don't think those of us from the indoor air quality world really had focused as much on as you guys do. I think that the contents is something that really has opened my eyes. And then Andy also mentioned during his show the issue with respect to laundering of sheets and bed coverings and so on and so forth, how they are oftentimes the source of some of these infections, whether it be fungal or bacterial infections in hospitals. So I thought that was very interesting, and it's kind of changed my feelings on and the way I look at some of the projects I do, and we focus more on contents now as maybe a source of issues for people. The other thing I think you hit really good is the microbiome thing. That just opened a lot of eyes when we had people like Jeff Siegel and guy from Jordan Petya from up Hill. And by the way, we'll be doing a show June 22nd because Sloan has since shifted focus, and they're now looking at the chemistry of the indoor environment. And we'll be doing a show with Rich Coursey and his group down at the University of Texas in Austin when they kick off the new chemistry of the indoor environment research projects that they're doing and they're sponsoring. I guess the other main thing that really has kind of opened my eyes over the years is how the medical community has been they've just been so open and so willing to work with us. We've had just tremendous people like John Willett, who I consider one of the pioneers, and hopefully we can get to a little clip we have with John Willett on actually he was talking about endotoxin and some of the issues with respect to bacteria that his patients had gone through. And then Jim Sublett, and we've had Dr. Richie Shoemaker on the show quite a few times, and how these folks have been so gracious with their time. And I guess what's interesting is, we go all the way back to Harriet Burge on like the third show I think we ever did, and we were talking about the show before that. Nick Money was on, a PhD out of Ohio. I can't remember which school. He was talking about the fragments from mold and fungi that maybe are a cause of problems for people. And then Harriet came on the next week, and she said, I don't think it's the fragments that are necessarily the issue. And I just got an email from Richie Shoemaker, Dr. Shoemaker, and now they're looking more at things like the actinomycetes and some of the bacterial issues. They're kind of changing focus from the fungi. So 10 years in counting, and we're still not sure what causes the health effects that we find people have living in water damaged buildings. And that's been just fascinating to me over the years, John.
Joe, if I might just add one thing. I think going back to Streifel, and one of the things that really ties all this together is when we were talking to Andy, one of the things he talked about was drones and the ability of being able to diagnose this problem, which was the laundry, and being able to utilize drones. And now I think, in our industry, 10 years ago, no one would have even thought about it. And now, you can buy them at inexpensively, and they're used in restoration for looking at roofs, looking at the outsides of buildings, and diagnosing what's going on in hospital ventilation systems from the outside. So
there's been a lot of changes over 10 years. Let's go to Bob Krell. Bob, throw one out there, buddy.
Hey, so again, congratulations on the 500. Wow, that went fast. We're old.
Yes.
I guess the question I have to ask, first thing is, why did you start IAQ Radio? Here we are at your epic 500 episode. What prompted you guys to jump in, into this media arena?
Cliff, you want to take that?
I can. I happen to have been listening. There's a fellow by the name of Ron Morris in Pittsburgh, and he had a radio show called The American Entrepreneur. And I used to listen to it every Saturday when I was driving my dad to religious services that happened to be on the radio, and my dad and I would listen to it. And he talked about investing in a company called TalkShoe, which would enable anyone to do a podcast. And at that time, there was no immediacy towards information within the industry. It was all print, and it was all about 90 days old. So something would happen in the industry and it would come to print about 90 days later. And I just thought that was just too, it just took too much time to get important information, out to the public. So, I talked to Joe, and 10 years later, TalkShoe ended up being the technology that we used to do the show for I guess over 9 years anyway. And then, we kind of switched to newer, better technology.
Yeah, we just switched over. TalkShoe was bought out. For those that aren't aware, I don't know that we ever really talked much about this. And, it was a bit painful when they were bought out by another company. I guess it's freeconferencecall.com or whomever owns that. And it's like when John Downey probably could understand better than many what I'm going to say here. When IAQradio decided to get rid of their management company for many, many years, Tom Hill and his group changed management companies, I should say, and then eventually went to self-management. They tried to switch computers and the database and all, and move it over to Las Vegas. And whenever you take an old computer database and program that's been patched together over 15, 20 years and try and move it somewhere, and you make one little update to one program and it breaks everything around it, I think that's what the new owners of TalkShoe went through. And in fact, to this day, we have trouble uploading shows to the TalkShoe website, which is why we moved over to Podbean and of course to the Zoom shows. Plus Zoom gave us the ability to do both audio and video. I think Cliff was a little leery at first about the video side of things, but it seems to be working out pretty well, Cliff.
Well, I just have to shave and wear clothes for the show, so it's like
actually just shirts. You still can go pantsless.
Yeah, my mom always said I had a face for radio, so that was off.
You and me both, but it is a lot more work, and I think that was another one of your concerns, and I agree. It's a lot more work to do an audio and video show. We have to put together a lot of times PowerPoints for the guests. This is a little easier today when we just have a conversation like this, but it's a little bit more work. It takes a little more, and the needs are a little more. You've got to have a little more computing power, and we'd be lost without John here, our engineer, but we've made it work. So I'm pretty happy with what we've been able to do so far, and I think there's a lot of things we can do, and hopefully we'll work with you, Bob, in the future on making this a little better. I know you do a lot of this this type of medium, and you've got your nice studio there, and we'll keep working on getting to that point. John Lapotaire, jump in here, please.
Yeah, I'd like to hear the lighter side. I mean, we're all in positions where we do a lot of interviews. We meet a lot of interesting people. So I'm curious to see, who was your toughest interview? I mean, we've got these guys sometimes we try to talk to, and you just can't get anything out of them other than a yes or a no. They don't elaborate. So who was your toughest interview?
Wow. That's a good question, John. I've got to say toughest, not in that he didn't want to talk much. It's just toughest in that I had to do a lot of background work and research and reading. And then, you read his work and you've got to look at, 4 other things to kind of help you figure it out. And that's Richie Shoemaker and the work that he's done. In fact, he just sent me, and hopefully this will be coming out soon, he wrote a book to actually try and help explain some of the terminology with the RNA and the DNA and all the genes and the brain waves they're looking at now and all that. I mean, that has been really tough. Just trying to get that distilled down to the point where we can get the information he has and present it in a way that people can grasp it. And I think we've done okay on that. We could probably do a little better, but he was really tough to bring down to that level where I think everybody could understand what he was talking about. Cliff?
Yeah, well, I think with Richie, he also talks very, very quickly as well. And I had difficulty, trying to keep track of everything he said and, taking notes as we went along. But John, I think honestly, I don't know the answer, but I can tell you 2 ways we can get there. If we looked at the time of all of our shows, whatever the shortest show was, that was most likely the hardest interview. And then we never repeated it. So we never had him back, if we were just getting yes or no answers. To me, I think some of the most difficult shows were really the international shows, where we had someone from a foreign country who was not a good speaker. And we probably had more issues with Asians than we had with Europeans, in terms of those shows. But they were probably the hardest because it's just difficult to process.
What was your? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, the other time I would say, and it wasn't a guest, it was the technology. This technology over the last 10 years has come a long way. I talked about the problems we've had with TalkShoe here recently, and it caused us to move over. But this new Zoom platform that we're using is just fantastic. There were days when I remember we couldn't get on TalkShoe, and we were trying, and it's 11:57, and we're signing in, and that really caused some angst on my part, and John here as well, and then, we'd be in the middle of a show and suddenly TalkShoe would just drop us, or maybe my internet would drop or something like that. That could be very frustrating as well. But over the last, since we started with Zoom, a lot of those problems have gone away, and seems to be working pretty well for us.
There was one show, Joe, and I think that you'll remember it because you were probably as angry and as embarrassed as I was when we had a show and someone actually went on and started putting all sorts of profanity in the chat. And we got so mad. Joe and I were so mad that we wanted to find out who did this. And my son, and who is a techie, and at the time is working with Google and so on. And so we ended up tracing this to some coffee shop in Europe, the person that actually did it. And they just kind of came on by accident. They never kind of came on again. But that was one that I still remember and get angry.
That was a tough one. Yeah. And well, go ahead. You guys jump in anytime. Pete, what about you, Pete Consigli? We got you on the phone, but not on the video here. But jump in here, will you?
Yeah. Can you hear me okay, Joe?
Sound great.
Yeah. So I got a couple of questions. I remember when I had a conversation with Cliff over 10 years ago, and he said to me, he goes, Pete, we got something really, really big and new and cutting edge that we're onto. And he asked me if I had ever heard of a podcast, and he could have been talking Chinese to me because I didn't know what a podcast was. And anyway, he said, yeah, there's this thing called TalkShoe, and you got to go to their website. And we're going to be doing this thing that's really going to set the industry, on its gear. And then that was it in the early stages of IAQ Radio. And Cliff has always been an innovator and a pioneer and always pushed the envelope and introduced new things to the industry. You know, traditionally, the things that he always introduced had, you know, to do with the cleaning and restoration processes, and then he kind of moved into this information age. I think that the question that I have is, there's a couple. First of all, what led to the show being named IAQ Radio versus, you know, Cleaning and Restoration Radio, which is, you know, kind of Cliff's background? And I don't know if it's ever been shared as to, you know, how did the Z-Man and Radio Joe become partners on this show? What was the genesis of that? You know, why isn't it, you know, Radio Steve or Radio, you know, Arlene, you know, versus Radio Joe? So I'd be interested in that.
Cliff, you want to run with that one?
Okay. I guess in terms of, you know, how, you know, Joe and I first met, he was teaching a mold remediation class in Duquesne, Pennsylvania, you know, at his old office with his old partners. And I went and I took the class, and I met Joe and I met Danny. And the reason I took the class is that different organizations, you know, were offering certification training. And I just thought that, you know, it was necessary to, you know, to have the training. So, you know, Joe and I met. This was kind of when IAQRC was starting to do their mold remediation training as well, because I'd taken a course there as well. And it just, so, you know, we met at that time. I think Joe was really focused on getting out of safety, which the company was doing a lot of safety training. And, you know, he was kind of fascinated by the mold side of it. And I was, you know, kind of fascinated by the mold side of it. And for me, there were some economic reasons. I felt that as a provider of products and services and training in the industry, that we needed a platform for every certification organization that was involved. So the IAQRC one, you know, would not be a problem because we were already trainers for that. But, you know, I was looking for, you know, something that, you know, with now, what's called, I guess, ACAC, you know, to get involved with their program. And it looked, you know, Joe and I were kind of, you know, wanted to get more involved, and I think his partners wanted to get less involved. So essentially, Joe and I bought out, you know, the other partners. And then, you know, as far as IAQ Radio went, I think it was a natural. You know, I think restoration really is about, you know, what's going on really under roof, you know, when you think about it. You know, if you think about the roof of the building and everything underneath, I think both IAQ and restoration is really involved with that. And it just seemed IAQ was the, you know, the buzzword at that particular point. And, you know, so we kind of kept it because, you know, that became the brand. I think sometimes indoor environmental quality, you know, may be a better name and more inclusive, but, you know, once you build the brand, you know, Chevrolet's not changing their name after, you know, 90 some years. So, you know, we're kind of in the same position.
And I will also want to mention, we were IAQA, Indoor Air Quality Association approved training provider when Cliff and I met, and IAQA has been a sponsor as well. I think I may have left them out for, you know, quite a few years now. They've been one of our association sponsors, and we really appreciate that. We continue to do work with the Indoor Air Quality Association. We've covered them over the years. We had John on, actually, our last show as the president of the Indoor Air Quality Association. So, you know, it's been a tough challenge. You know, do we stay with IAQA approved training provider? And then, as Cliff said, we prepare people for the ACAC certification, which is a true third-party certification, you know, or do we make a little more money and do the IAQRC route and certify people when we just don't believe in that? And we've stuck with the IAQA over the years and prepared people for the ACAC certifications. And, you know, not that they don't have their own issues. You know, ACAC has their own issues, but it is a true third-party certification. They've got their approval from, or their I don't know what they call it, but they're third party accredited through some of the certifying organizations out there, and we've continued to run with it over the years. So it's, I guess that's the answer. Who haven't I brought on yet? Let's see. I think I got everybody. Let's go back to John.
Hey, Joe, hold on before you move to John. I kind of had a little bit of a follow-up. Two things, and think about it. If you guys don't want to answer them now, maybe you can do it during the roundup. So here's my question, really for both of you, but maybe more for Cliff. The IAQA radio you guys have really kind of been cutting edge from the very beginning to the evolution, to the way the cleaning, restoration, the global aspect has kind of come as you evolved over the last 10 years. What do you see going on, and where do you see the show going, in the next 2 to 3 years? Or, what do you see really the life of the show? Where do you see it going? And then the other thing, Joe, and this is specifically for you, of all the shows and interviews you've done, which is your most favorite one? Now, the reason I didn't ask Cliff that is because in the past, Cliff has actually shared his favorite show. And maybe that could be a trivia question, Cliff, because I know which one it was. Right. I'm not sure whether it's changing or not, but it was one of my favorite interviews that you ever did also. So anyway, that's my follow-up. Turn it back to you, Joe.
Well, as far as where I see this headed, I suspect in the future we'll be more aligned with groups like the Sloan Foundation and maybe others. I've talked to people like even EPA, the Environmental Protection, EPA and Sloan and maybe some others will hopefully see the value in helping IAQ Radio be able to do a little bit more. Like I said, we're going to be at the opening of the Chemistry of the Indoor Environment, and Sloan has been really nice in helping us with that and making sure that our expenses are covered and that we'll make a little bit of money on it. But I see it that way, Pete, is more aligned with the not-for-profits and the associations like Sloan and Heinz Foundation and others. I think maybe that will be how things go in the future. But we'll see. It's really tough because as anybody that's done this knows, it's not a moneymaker. You better either love what you do or you better find something else, because you're not going to make a ton of money doing podcasts. All right, Bob, what do you think?
Yeah. Well, yeah, and actually publishing too. And we're kind of, we're a hybrid in that regard because, we've been doing video media for, 7-8 years, even prior to the magazine. And yeah, it's tough. I mean, it's tough when you don't have a big bankroll behind you. And, like you guys, again, you're a self-financed organization for the most part. You have sponsors, as are we, the Healthy Indoors brand and everything is, we're a small organization, growing pains, of course. Where's it going to go? I think the whole global trend toward information, it has to go upward, right? And we're not, the readily accessible information, both to the industry and the end consumers, the commercial and the residential consumers. I mean, I think that's really the place to be, and we are all there. So it's I think that it'll be exciting times, and I agree with you with the platform stuff. We started using Zoom a couple of years ago too, and I think the technology caught up to the ideas. Susan Valenti and I 20 years ago, talked about having a digital publication and doing video stuff. And we had the ideas, but you couldn't do it then.
Yep.
20 years ago, that was, now it's possible. It's feasible. Here, we sit here today doing a live video broadcast without having to have $1 million worth of hardware.
I was going to say, Pete, the one thing that we have, looking back on it, I'm not sure that, I think we had a vision, but we weren't sure exactly what it was, at the beginning. But looking back over 10 years and 500 shows, what we have is a factual, oral account of important and historical events in the order in which they occurred. And I don't know that was our intention, at the beginning. But, when you kind of look back over the 10 years, it's what was going on in building science, and what was going on in indoor air quality, what was going on in restoration, including, political issues and financial issues and governmental issues and all those other things. It's all there, and 500 episodes. So I don't know anywhere else that it is available in the same way, in the same format. And as far as the blogging stuff, I kind of regret not having done that from the beginning, because I think we probably have, probably 300 plus blogs, something like that. And they're really a compendium, because, what the blogs do is they've taken, what was in the show, condensed it down in a pretty concise form, and somebody within, a couple of minutes can look at that and determine, do I want to spend an hour listening to that show or don't I? And, it's just nice that it's all archived and, it's all available, online, and it's free.
The other thing I wanted to mention that is archived, and we're going to go to our halftime and thank our sponsors, but I think one of the things I'm most proud of is having interviews, and I've got a list of them here, with 16 industry icons that are no longer with us. And we're probably one of the few groups that have these folks on tape, some on video. Well, I don't know if we have any on video yet, because we just started doing that about 5 shows ago, maybe 6 shows. But if you look over this list of people that we've had over the years who are no longer with us, unfortunately, people like Mike O'Reilly, Lloyd Weaver, who was a disaster restoration pioneer, Phil McLaughlin and Bill Yobe, Bob Baker. We've got 3 shows with Bob Baker, who's just, you can't talk about the indoor air quality industry without talking about Bob Baker. Melinda Ballard, Butch Carpenter, Craig Whitaker, who was on the show with us a while back now, 2007. Thad Godish, who a lot of people may not know much about Thad Godish, but back in the day, he was the guru for indoor air quality. He did put a lot of stuff up on the internet out of Ball State. Of course, Marty King, who I know, Pete, you spoke so fondly of Marty over the years. Phil Moray, who was just, one of the early pioneers in the indoor air quality world and the mold world. Larry Robertson, first IAQA president. Paul Lorenzi, who, was one of the, I guess, the founders of the Delmhorst Instrument Company. And then Jack Thrasher, one of my favorites, and one of my favorite shows, actually, you mentioned that. Maybe not the favorite, but one of my favorites was with Brian Baker. A Canadian perspective on IEQ and HVAC. Brian he listened to every show. We had him on the shows. He was just a great guy that was out in the field actually doing this work every day. He just soaked up information. He loved to learn new things, and he loved to share that with people. And then, of course, Kurt Bolden, who many in the disaster restoration industry know as someone who did think outside of the box and invented things and did a lot of training for people over the years. So it's just great to have these folks all, archived. Anybody can listen at any time to some of the greats from the past in this industry. Let's stop and thank our most important group of, people over the years, our sponsors.
IAQ Radio would like to thank our association, the Indoor Air Quality Association, a nonprofit multidisciplinary organization dedicated to promoting the exchange of indoor environmental information through education and research. Visit them at IAQA.org. Gray Wolf Sensing Solutions, who use advanced sensor software technology and embedded computers to provide superior environmental test instrumentation. Visit them, wolfsense.com. IAQ marquee sponsors are John Don Products, where restoration and abatement contractors shop. Visit them at jondon.com. That's JONDON.com. Healthy Indoor Magazine, a free online digital magazine for industry professionals and consumers. Subscriptions are available at healthyindoors.com. Particles Plus, engineers and manufacturers, feature rich particle counters, air quality monitoring, instrumentation, and vacuum pump technology. ParticlesPlus.com. Count on us.
Okay, and I want to add the Restoration Industry Association just came on last week, and real happy to have them on board as an association sponsor. So, Cliff, I think maybe let's go over to John Lapotaire. John, anything you'd like to add or any questions?
We have a lot of breaking news that's introduced on the show. What are some of the most memorable things that you guys can remember introducing via IAQ Radio?
Good question. Cliff, you have one off the top of your head?
I think that, in terms of announcing, I think it's what do people get fired up about. And, what they've gotten fired up about, and typically what we've announced as well. I think part of it was standards, particularly about issues over IAQRC standard development process. There were people that weren't happy with it. And, we confronted it. We actually had both sides. I remember we had, kind of a point counterpoint. We had Carl Grimes. We did an interview with him because he was kind of protesting. And we also had, if I'm not mistaken, was it Larry Cooper that we had or Howie or both that kind of had the IAQRC's position. So I think the standards, it was news within the industry. I also think that what got, when you get in a restore's, when you interfere with their ability to make money and their ability to call shots, I think they get upset. So I think that, the shows that we did in regards to third-party administration, huge. People were really fired up about it. And, we had a number of different shows, and people were very, very outspoken about it. I think also down in Florida with the assignment of benefits, same thing. People wanted to know what was going on with the legislation, in Florida, because it seems that while a lot of things started in California and then would move east, I think what's going on in Florida in terms of, hurricane coverage, and I think it's going to start in the east and it's going to move west.
Yeah, I think that was that was one of my follow-up questions, or what were some of the most controversial topics, and I think you've hit them. You've got the two sides of the licensing law, two sides of the AOB, two sides of the certification. These are tough subjects. As the IAQA president, it's always difficult for me because I've got people in our organization that fight vigorously on both sides of the fence. But those are some pretty controversial topics. What were your most controversial interviews, Joe?
Well, I'd have to say we've probably some of the licensing shows. I think the fact that states are trying to license what we do or what some people do, and I could never quite understand why mold was licensed and things like fire restoration or sewage cleanup weren't important enough to license. That just never made sense to me. Or HVAC cleaning. I mean, there's some really important work that people do, and if it was if it was that much of a problem for consumers, then you would think we'd have some licensing on that, or at least attempts at it. I guess the other thing I want to say, the hurricane coverage, I think, has been something that we've been really good with, and that we've been following that really closely. And the other thing is we didn't just drop it. A lot of people come in, they talk about the hurricane on the first day that it happens, but then, they kind of go away and they don't come back. Well, we kept coming back, and we're still coming back and talking about the recovery from some of the hurricanes. Controversial, I think the biggest controversy I run into is those that, kind of downplay the mold as not an issue, and those that kind of make it into something more than what it is, or the people claim they make it into something more than what it is. I think that's been something we've been pretty good about. We've brought on people like David Governo up in Boston, and he would bring on an MD that didn't feel like it was as big of an issue. Hung Chung, we had him on, Dr. Chung. So we've tried to get people on both sides of the issue, and those tend to get a little, we get a little feedback on those from people that aren't happy that we're bringing on certain people. I've had people actually quit getting on our show announcements because they didn't like that we were bringing a certain guest back on, more than once. And so I think that's been kind of interesting to watch. And, of course, we were all over the IAQA, ASHRAE joining together. We did a lot on that, and I think that's still kind of working its way out and still kind of an interesting topic. And then, of course, like Cliff said, the whole thing with the IICRC and bringing Carl on and talking about standards, those shows tend to get a lot of downloads too.
Another thing that got a lot of activity and a lot of action was shows that we did with RIA, these Donnybrook shows over different technologies that were used for drying. And really that kind of stretched the limits because, we had multiple people. Was it like 6 or 8 or 10 people on simultaneously? And, this was with, the delicate balance with talk show and so on and so forth, keeping our fingers crossed that, that we'd be able to, have a broadcast that day. But I think those shows, might have been the highest in terms of, the number of people that actually downloaded it.
No, you're right. And the other ones I've enjoyed, and hopefully it will be easier with the new format, was being live on site, doing shows like at the Violand Executive Summit. That was a lot of fun, and we had a lot of people around a table, and we were able to talk about in the most recent years we've kind of been bringing the young guns and the older guys in that talk about the things that are changing in the industry and how they're attacking different issues that come up, like the assignment of benefits or the third party administrator thing. That's been a huge issue. So it's been a lot of fun, and I think we're going to do more of that. I'll be doing something live, like I mentioned before, from the Sloan event. I did cover the PM 2.5 and health event in Washington, D.C. that EPA had at the National Academy of Sciences. I thought that was a great event, a great show that we did, but we couldn't do that one live. We also covered when Rich Shaughnessy and Sloan again did the Research to Practice event this year in Orlando. Actually, John, you were there with us. Couldn't cover it live, but in fact, both Johns were there. Could not cover that one live, but we did do a show right after that about the types of things people were talking about there. And I think bringing that new information to people about what's coming out, people like James Scott, Dr. Scott we had on, who was talking about the microbiome and sampling dust, and that, we're going to eventually be able to take a sample of dust and find the microbiome from that indoor environment for, less than what it costs to do a spore trap air sample, which gives you, 1/10 or 1/100th of the information. So we're going to continue to do that.
Hey, Joe, I was just thinking, this really isn't show 500. It's really 501, okay? Because do you remember the show that vanished and went away? Because somebody forgot to turn on the recorder.
He's with us here.
I know. We're not going to mention his name.
Oh, okay.
Hey, Joe.
We did a show.
Joe, remember?
The IAQradio.
Yep. Pete.
Joe, remember that show that we did in Atlanta, the live show? We were talking about a live show in Atlantic City after the Sandy conference, and that's when Bob Krell, it was the first time, I think that was the first time he ever streamed the show. I remember we had Tom Peter, and I don't remember who else. We had a couple guests, and Bob had his big boom thing all set up. Was that the first time you ever did any live streaming and even knew about that, what that was all about?
Probably. Bob?
Yeah, that was 2012, right?
Yeah, right, in Atlantic City.
Or 13.
Hector Johanning and the group, the Bioaerosols Conference. Are they still doing that, Bob?
No, it wasn't the bioaerosol. That was the thing on the Sandy. The lessons learned from Hurricane Sandy. That was kind of a unique one-time show.
True. I think also I want to mention that the Pittsburgh Protocol shows that we've done, and then going over some of the odor investigation techniques with Cliff. And I also I'd be remiss if I didn't mention some of the shows we did with Dr. Dietrich Wow, who was our technical director for probably the first 7 years of our show. And I just felt like we had to get people to hear Dieter, and I wish we would have had this capability then. Dieter since retired, he's had some health issues, so I don't know that we'll be able to get him back. But let's play a quick clip of Dr. Wow.
1 part per million is very easily defined 2 ways, and it's easy to remember. If you have 16 gallons of gin, and you put 1 drop of vermouth in it, and you stir it all up very nicely, now you have obviously a very dry martini, and you have a scientific martini because it is a 1 part per million martini. No.
That was our technical director. He had a way of bringing things back to booze. 16 gallons of gin and 1 drop of vermouth. You've got a 1 part per million martini. But if anybody's ever seen Dieter speak, I urge people to go back and listen to the shows he did with us. Even 8-10 years ago, he was doing some really good industrial hygiene. If you're not real good with industrial hygiene, maybe you're more of a restoration guy or a building science guy, and you need that good industrial hygiene background, go back and listen to some of the shows we did with Dieter. We really miss Dieter, and send out our best wishes to him here. Cliff, Pete, I want to go back to a question you asked a little earlier, and that was about my favorite show. And I thought a lot about this because John had sent John Downey had sent some questions ahead of time, and people may not realize, but we had an MD on this show back. I want to say this was probably within the first year. John Ouellette, Ouellette, Dr. John Ouellette, who was considered a pioneer in the field of doing indoor environmental assessments and tying that together with the medical perspective. He would actually go out and investigate some of his patients' homes. And I've got a short clip. I want to play a little bit on endotoxin with Dr. John Ouellette.
Can you talk a little bit about endotoxins and whether or not they play a role in allergic response?
I never thought you'd ask. Everybody gets excited about mold because we can see that. What we don't see is the gram-negative bacteria. If we have a sewer backup, if we have a wet carpet, if we have a dog that drags his butts across the carpet and gets the gram-negative material all over that, we are going to grow. We're going to grow the gram-negative bacteria. Now, when you start thinking about microorganisms, we start thinking about weapons of mass destruction. Every particular organism out there has their weapons of mass destruction. So the endotoxin is going to be trying to fend off the molds are going to try to fend off them. So everyone can produce these toxins so that they can have their place on the map. Well, the gram-negative bacteria produce endotoxin, and that's a large molecule that I'll tell our people listening that if you go into a wet, damp house or one with sewer, or you don't even need a sewer backup to get that, and then all of a sudden you get flu-like symptoms, you get headache, you feel just terrible, you feel rotten, and you'll get inflammation of the airway, you get a stuffy nose, postnasal drainage, cough. Those are the classic symptoms that one gets from that toxic product produced by endotoxin.
This was 8 years ago, 9 years ago, we had Dr. Ouellette on, and he was talking about endotoxin, and then he talked a little bit about actinomycetes. And, when everybody else was focused on mold, he was still saying, we got to look at these other issues as well. And now it's kind of come full circle. We've had, like I was mentioning, I had email from Richie Shoemaker. He's back to looking at he's always looked at it, but now they're looking at actinomycetes and they're looking at gram-negative bacteria and endotoxin, and they still haven't quite figured out what it is that causes people to be sick in these buildings. But fascinating stuff. We also, I want to thank Dr. Jay Portnoy, who's been on the show, the guys from Children's Mercy, Kevin Kennedy, Luke Gard, the fantastic work they're doing. So I could go on forever over these guys, but let's go over to John. You still had a couple. John Downey. You had a couple more questions on there.
Yeah, I was muted. They must have. I apologize. They muted me because my phone kept going off, and it just did again. Well, I guess since we're near the end of the show, this is more of a personal question. It's for each of you. Joe, tell us something about Cliff that we don't know that we should know. And Cliff, you get to return the favor by telling us something about Joe that maybe we don't know and we should know.
Okay.
All right. I'll start out. I've got two. One, a lot of people are familiar with the fact that Cliff has been very successful in business. He's sold one of his companies there and has been very successful, but the man continues to work as if, there's no tomorrow. I mean, he's a hardworking guy that just doesn't stop and continues to start new companies. He's, the oldest one on this panel right now, but he continues to go at it and never stops. And is a hardworking guy. He doesn't take too many breaks, too many vacations. Got 3 or 4 companies going right now, and he's just been a real hard worker and a great partner to work with. The other thing I don't know, I think some people know, but Cliff's a former Marine. I don't think everybody knows that. I don't know, what years were you in the Marines, Cliff?
1970 to 1972, but fortunately I didn't shoot at anybody and nobody shot at me. But then there was the day that the 45 went off accidentally, but that's a whole other story.
I mean, when did Vietnam end? Like 70?
It's like 73, 74.
Around there. Okay. So, that was when things were winding down. Him and our other buddy, Danny, Special Forces Hunt, I've got to always recommend, say a shout out to Danny. But those are the two things I don't know that people realize.
I think, about Joe, I think there's two things. Number one, he cares. In my opinion, too much, oftentimes about too many, because I think politically we're on opposite sides of the spectrum. And I don't know how many of you go back to 10 years ago when they had kind of Hannity and Combs, and Joe and I were very much like that politically. But I do think he has a big heart, and he wants to take care of everyone. I think the second thing is he's really a sponge, particularly with issues related to building science. And I think that he's an excellent building science practitioner. And I think a lot of people probably don't know that. But if I had a problem in my house, he's the first person I'd call.
Well, thank you, Cliff. All right, gentlemen, we're kind of toward the end here. Throw out a final thought or final question. Let's go around the horn. Pete, let's start with you.
Well, I don't know. I have a question. I think so. Cliff, is your favorite interview still the one with Claude Blackburn?
Yeah, it still is. But the thing is, my second was the Pete Consigli Conversation series. So that's you're in the running, because I thought those were.
Well, you actually had disclosed the thing about Claude before we did the series, but the series, that was kind of unusual because it was the first time we did a 2-hour show with an intermission, and then we had to do a part 3 follow-up. And before Downey gets to make some smart-ass remark about that, I really think he was very surprised. And Lapotaire, don't tell me that you're not smiling, or you too, Krell.
Totally. I had my mouth open, Pete.
I think you did. Cliff, the one thing that you didn't mention when you guys were reflecting back, actually there were two things. One is, I think that probably one of the most cutting-edge things that this show ever did in the very early years was the show when you actually announced the rebrand of RAA from ASCR. It was really, in my mind, it was the early DNA of the show that gave it that kind of 60 minutes kind of feel of all the breaking news that you did. And, I mean, it was a complete shocker to the industry because they held that entire process very close to the vest, and as we well know, it was very controversial, a lot of fallout. The other show, Joe, and I'm surprised that you didn't mention it, the things that were very controversial was the aftermath of the consolidation between IAQA, the Indoor Air Council, which became ACAC, and then the IESO. Because, you know, when you talk about Bob Baker and Tommy Iacobellis and all the guys that were involved in that whole thing, and then the subsequent kind of buyer's remorse and falling out of that, which is some of the same issues I think this whole ASHRAE IAQA kind of thing was done. I very specifically remember there were a number of shows on that. So now those are some of the kind of things that I recall. And but you know, look, you guys have done a fantastic job. I'm not so sure that the industry recognizes the power of the archives of the information, like Cliff talked about, the sequential order, the time frame. You know, it's really kind of like the industry. You know, the IAQA Google, if you would, is go to IAQ Radio. I'm not so sure that people recognize and understand how much information is there. The blogs have been unbelievable. I love the idea, Cliff, maybe when you guys do some of those Flashback Fridays, if you go back and do some of the early shows, we didn't have a blog like you did with Major Long, and then print a blog on some of those early shows where we didn't do a blog. I think that'd be something that would really be fantastic to think about, because it'll add more information and capture some of that old information, which may be new again. So anyway, but good luck in the future, guys. I've enjoyed, you know, my role in the show. I'm very happy to hear RAA has finally came on as a sponsor to the show. Anyway, here's to the next decade.
Yeah. Thanks for your support over the years, Pete. The Consigli Chronicles, that was you know what, that's a show anybody in the restoration industry, a series of shows. Cliff, we got to put that in the blog, that people should go back. If you want to know where the restoration industry came from to get to the point where it's at today, you've got to listen to the Consigli Chronicles on that. He's just the historian for the industry, and we appreciate having you with us. Let's let Bob Krell go ahead. Bob, any final thoughts, questions?
Yeah, I mean, a quick question and a final thought too. I'll ask the question first, though. Well, actually, I'll give you the final thought first, and then I'll ask the question. Because, you know, I mean, I think you guys have really pioneered a lot for this industry, you know, and again, congratulations. And, you know, I think the whole industry appreciates what you've done. Looking forward to, you know, continued working together on stuff in between publication and stuff. We've always kept, you know, since from our onset with Healthy Indoors, or almost from the beginning, we've had the IAQ Radio show as part of the digital feature. We do have to do an upgrade, by the way. Now that you have video, we need to get your video archive going in there. So
yes, sir.
Look for that in the April issue. We actually will do that. But, you know, definitely looking to collaborate more and do more things. Again, I think we have the same goal of getting information out there, you know, out to the industry. So that's a great thing. So here's the question: what's next for you guys? Where do you see this going? You know, where do you want to see it go? And that's a real loaded question, right?
Well, I'll say.
I know.
First, I want to
another
mention,
hour now.
John, Bob, you've kind of filled a niche that the old Indoor Environment Connections had for many years, and we did have a lot of shows where we brought Glenn Fellman on, and his magazine is another great archive of you know, the indoor air quality world and the history of it. So it's great that you've been able to fill that void. You know, I don't know where we're headed. I mean, we just kind of get up and put our one foot in front of the other. I know this. I'm off next week. All right. doing a damn thing on this show next week.
That's the immediate future.
That's the immediate.
That's as far ahead as you want to see, right?
As far ahead as I can see right now. I mean, it's a lot of work getting this together, and I appreciate all the help we get from different sources. But I think we're kind of in the future right now, Bob. I've wanted to go to audio and video for a long time. We kind of shied away for many years because we didn't think that we could do it justice. Not just us, but the technology wasn't quite where we wanted it. And now I think it is. And so I think you're going to see a lot more of this, a lot more of the audio and video. I think we'll be following more specific trends, I guess, like following things like, we'll continue to follow things like what's RIA doing, what's the Indoor Air Quality Association doing, what's IAQRC doing, but also what are other groups doing. We've done a lot more recently with the home performance world, and that has been just tremendous. And I think you'll see us doing a lot more of that as well, because I think the home performance guys, they used to have their own little energy niche and insulation, and now they're branching out into the indoor air quality world. And I think as a result, we've got to cover that, and they bring a lot to the table. I mean, those guys have been working on the built environment for many, many years. They know what mistakes were made. They know what things need to be fixed. They know to some degree that what they do can help people have a healthier, better performing indoor environment. So I think we'll be doing more of that. Cliff?
Okay, well, Pete and I took a tour to Italy. Actually, we went there twice through RIA, and there was a restaurant there that the name of the restaurant was It Is What It Is. And how they got the name of the restaurant is that they would only have one thing for lunch. It was what he made. You either had it or you didn't have it. So I think, number one, the show is what it is. Then, what will be. I mean, I'm not sure exactly, what's going to happen really in the future. But I think the one thing that I would like to see more of is preservation. I'm very, very concerned about how much information technology has been lost in fire restoration, and maybe we can begin to preserve some of that with some hands-on video, shorts, 5-10 minutes, how you do this, how you do that. Because in all honesty, from talking to people, they no longer know how to do it. So I think we may be doing some of that.
Great points. Let's go to, let's see who we have. John Lapotaire. Final thoughts, questions.
Well, this has been a wonderful roller coaster to be a part of. I can still remember my first introduction to Cliff close to 20 years ago, and then meeting Joe with my first training to be a CIEC in the early 2000s. It just seems like we've come a long way. I come from the home building side, and I actually met Cliff as a home builder. And then the two of you guys have actually helped me transition my knowledge of building science and building performance into the consultant I am today. Cliff literally just a few weeks ago helped Lydia and I with a home builder that had an ammonia odor throughout the house. I called Cliff. I said, how do I get rid of this ammonia odor? And he immediately says, you need this chemical. They use it to get ammonia out of fish tanks. Hang them all over the house and you'll fix your problem. I was able to source it, and as always with Cliff's answers, it was spot on, and the problem went away. That's been the kind of mentoring I've had, been very fortunate to have over the last 20 years. So to be on the radio show with you guys, I'm proud to be here with you guys, and I'm happy to see where you guys have come with it. I'm excited to be here for the 500th show, and I hope I'm here for the next 100. Congratulations, guys.
John. If I could respond to that, I appreciate your comments, and sometime after I met you, I realized that you were a rising star, and you've risen, and now you're a star, and I'm very proud of what you and your wife have accomplished personally and professionally. So
I appreciate that very much.
Been a great relationship, and I love your wife, man. She's just the best. I love her. She's the best. All right, John Downey, final thoughts, questions, or did I already go there? I'm losing track, John.
There's too many of us.
I still have final thoughts. I kind of asked my final question, but final thoughts. Like John, I really appreciate that you decided to have me on the show, and it's actually been beneficial to me in ways that I didn't expect going in. This is a show about you guys, not about me. But as I've been sitting here listening to the different comments and perspectives, including Consigli talking about a lot of the shows and the need, and Cliff, you also talking about the need to have a record to remember the past, remember where we've been in order to know where we're going. And this is a little bit self-serving related to that, and that is as part of my role as the executive director of SIRI, I'm thinking that perhaps we can find a way to work with you guys in helping to communicate that information that you've collected over the years in the shows, maybe cross-linking or something along those lines, so that, because this is great information for the audience, the membership of SIRI as well, and some of them have it, a lot of them don't, but they need it, and it's ideal. It's a different format than a peer review double-blind study, but the people you've had on this show have all been involved in that sort of thing. And you guys have gained so much information, and you have a storage of so much good information that I really want to explore ways that we can work together in making sure that this information is available to as many people as possible. But thank you.
We're going to keep it free. Maybe we'll go to something where we have, I don't know, Cliff, maybe we'll go to something where we have another level, but I think it's always important to keep this information out there and free for people. And we couldn't do that without our sponsors. So I just thought I'd mention again before we go, thank you. Thank you so much to the people out there that have, stuck behind us through thick and thin. Here's a list of them up on there now. We got, a great group of sponsors over the years. And we appreciate your support. So this is Radio Joe Hughes saying thanks to our growing group of loyal listeners. It's been tough getting people to move over to the YouTube and the Podbean and get away from the TalkShoe thing. I mean, people were so used to just getting an automatic TalkShoe download over the years, and hopefully they'll get their act back together here, and we'll continue to try and put shows up on there. But I also want to thank my co-host, the Z-Man, Cliff Zlotnick. As always, it's been a pleasure working with you over the last going on 12 years or more, actually, since we started working together with IAQ Training. At the controls, John, you got to have faith. And thank you, gentlemen, for joining us today. It's been really nice to go back through the shows and talk a little bit about where we have come from and where we're headed. We'll be back in 2 weeks. And by the way, in 2 weeks, we're going to do another one of those home performance shows. We're going to have Nate Adams on. He may not know that yet, but I did talk to him a little bit. We're going to do part 2 with Nate. He's going to talk a little more about home performance, and we're going to go into the HVAC systems, and we're going to keep plugging away here, folks. So we'll be back in 2 Fridays with the next episode of IAQ Radio.
For IAQ Radio, I'm Spike Reel saying thanks for listening.